The road to the mountain
love, let's
cabin
take a
was
stroll.
broken,
Yes, dear.
silent,
Fine day
and
for it.
almost
Good boy,
forgotten.
staying close.
Most people avoided that road. It led nowhere. Or at least, that's what people believed. But for Samuel and Lillian Carter, that broken road became the place where their life truly began again. Years ago, they never imagined ending up there. They had lived in the city all their lives. Samuel worked as a mechanic for 40 years. His hands were always rough, but his heart was soft. Lillian worked at a small school cafeteria. She remembered every child's favorite meal and every birthday. They never had children of their own. So when they adopted two siblings, Marcus and Denise, they believed their home was finally complete. They gave everything to those children. Long work hours, missed vacations, savings spent on school fees, clothes, and dreams that were not their own. Samuel used to say, "We may not have given them life, but we will give them a good one." And for many years, it seemed true. The children grew up. They went to college. They moved to better neighborhoods. They built successful lives. At first, they visited often, then less, then only on holidays, then only phone calls. And slowly, even those stopped, Lillian noticed it first. The silence between calls became longer. Messages stayed unanswered. Excuses became normal. "They're busy," Samuel would say, trying to smile. But deep down, both of them felt it. They were being left behind. One winter evening changed everything. Samuel fell on the icy steps outside their house. His hip was injured badly. Lillian called both children. Marcus said he had an important meeting. Denise said she would try next week. No one came. Samuel spent 3 days in the hospital. When they returned home, the house felt different. Bigger, colder, empty. That night, Lillian sat quietly at the kitchen table and said something she had never said before. "Maybe we were holding onto a life that already left us." Samuel didn't answer, but he knew she was right. A month later, they sold the house. The neighbors were shocked. Their children were surprised, but not enough to stop them. The mountain cabin was cheap because no one wanted it. The roof leaked. The windows were broken. The land around it was wild and overgrown. It looked like a place where dreams went to die. But when Samuel stood there for the first time, looking at the mountains covered in morning fog, something inside him felt calm. For the first time in years, no one expected anything from him. No phone calls. No disappointments. Just silence. The first weeks were hard. The cabin had no proper heating. Water pipes froze at night. Lillian cried quietly when Samuel wasn't looking. She missed the noise of the city, even the traffic. Sometimes she stared at her phone, hoping it would ring. It didn't. But something strange started happening. Samuel began fixing things again. The roof first, then the porch, then the old garden behind the cabin. His hands remembered what his heart had forgotten: how to build. Lillian started cooking again, not out of duty, but because she wanted to. She planted flowers near the window, bright colors against the gray wood. Slowly, the ruined cabin began to change. And so did they. One morning, a hiker passing through stopped and asked for water. Then another came the next week. People began talking about the old couple who lived in the mountains and always offered warm food and kindness. The cabin no longer looked abandoned. It looked alive. But far away in the city, something else was happening. Marcus received a letter from a lawyer. Inside was a document he never expected. It was about the cabin and what Samuel and Lillian had decided to do with it. For the first time in years, Marcus felt uneasy because the parents he thought would always wait for him had finally stopped waiting. And when he looked at the date on the document, he realized something chilling. They had made this decision months ago, without telling him. Back at the mountain, Samuel stood on the porch watching the sunset. Lillian smiled beside him. For the first time in a long time, they were not abandoned. They were free. But neither of them knew that their new peaceful life was about to bring attention. Attention that would soon force their children to return. Not out of love, but because of what the cabin was becoming, and what it was now worth. The mountain cabin was no longer invisible. What once looked like a broken shelter hidden in the woods was slowly turning into something people talked about. Hikers shared pictures online. Travelers left kind messages on small pieces of paper that Lillian kept in a wooden box near the door. Best soup on the mountain. Kindest people we met on our trip. Feels like home. Samuel never cared about attention, but Lillian noticed something important. People didn't come because the cabin was beautiful. They came because of how they felt there. Peaceful. Welcome. Safe. And for the first time in years, Samuel and Lillian felt needed again. Not as parents waiting for calls, but as people who still had something to give. They began fixing more than just the cabin. Samuel rebuilt the old storage shed into a small guest room. Lillian placed flowers on every table. She started baking bread in the mornings, and the smell carried through the trees. Soon, hikers began asking if they could stay the night. At first, Samuel hesitated, but Lillian smiled and said, "Why not? This place saved us. Maybe it can help others too." So they allowed it. Word spread faster than they expected. A travel blogger posted a video calling it the hidden paradise on the mountain. Within weeks, more visitors arrived. Some stayed for a night. Some stayed for days. And slowly, without planning it, the ruined cabin became a small retreat. Not fancy, not expensive, just warm, just real. But success has a strange way of traveling. It doesn't only bring strangers. It brings people from the past. Marcus first saw the cabin online during a business lunch. Someone at the table showed him a video. "Look at this place," the man said. "Old couple turned a wreck into gold. Investors are already looking at land around that area." Marcus laughed at first. Then he froze. The camera showed Samuel fixing a fence, smiling in a way Marcus had not seen in years. Lillian waved at visitors, her face brighter than he remembered. His chest tightened. They looked happy. Without him. That feeling bothered him more than he expected. Later that night, he called Denise. "Did you know about this?" he asked. Denise had already seen it, and she had already checked the property value. The land around the cabin had increased in price. Tourism was growing. Developers were buying nearby plots. "That place could be worth a lot soon," Denise said quietly. There was a long silence between them. Neither said what they were really thinking, but both understood. A week later, a car climbed the narrow mountain road. Samuel noticed it first. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stared as the car stopped near the gate. Lillian stepped outside. Her heart dropped. Marcus and Denise stood there. Older, well-dressed, uncomfortable. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lillian smiled because she always did. "You made it up here," she said softly. The reunion was polite, but strange. Marcus talked about business. Denise talked about how busy life had been. They walked around the cabin, noticing every improvement, every visitor, every small sign of success. Samuel listened quietly. He noticed how their eyes studied the land more than their faces looked at him. That night, during dinner, Marcus finally said it. "You know, this place could become something big. With investment, marketing, expansion." Samuel put down his fork. "We didn't build this to make it big," he said calmly. Denise forced a smile. "We're just trying to help." But Lillian felt it. The same feeling she had years ago when phone calls became shorter and visits became rare. This wasn't about helping. This was about opportunity. Later that evening, after the children went to sleep, Lillian sat beside Samuel on the porch. "They didn't come back for us," she whispered. Samuel looked at the lights inside the cabin, where strangers laughed like family. "I know," he said quietly. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of fresh bread and pine. For the first time, Samuel realized something painful but clear. Their children had returned not because they missed home, but because home had finally become valuable. And this time, Samuel wasn't sure he was willing to give away again. What none of them knew was that the next morning would bring an offer, one so large it would test not only their forgiveness, but the meaning of family itself. Morning came quietly on the mountain, but the peace inside the cabin was gone. Lillian woke early, as she always did. She prepared coffee and bread, moving slowly so she wouldn't wake anyone. Outside, the sun painted the mountains gold, and birds filled the air with sound. It should have felt peaceful, but something felt heavy. Marcus and Denise came into the kitchen later than usual. They looked tired, but not from the mountain air. They looked like people thinking too much about numbers. Samuel noticed it immediately. He had seen that look before, in customers negotiating prices, in businessmen trying to hide their real intentions. After breakfast, a black SUV arrived at the gate. A man in a clean suit stepped out. He introduced himself as Mr. Keller, a property developer. His smile was polite, practiced. He spoke about opportunity, tourism growth, expansion, luxury cabins, a full retreat center. He talked about millions. Marcus listened carefully. Denise asked questions. They both nodded as if this conversation had already happened before. Samuel stayed quiet. Lillian felt her stomach tighten. Mr. Keller finally turned to Samuel. You built something special here, but with the right investment, it could become extraordinary. Samuel looked around. At the wooden porch he rebuilt with his own hands. At the garden Lillian planted when she was trying not to cry at night. At the small guest room where strangers arrived sad and left smiling. It already is, Samuel said calmly. The man's smile faded slightly. Marcus cleared his throat. Dad, you should at least consider it. This could secure your future. Samuel's eyes met his son's. Our future is already here. The meeting ended politely, but tension stayed behind like a storm waiting to break. That afternoon, Denise walked with Lillian near the garden. You don't have to work this hard anymore, Denise said gently. You deserve comfort. Lillian smiled, but her voice was soft. I am comfortable. Denise hesitated. You don't understand. This place could change everything for you. Lillian stopped walking. For us? She asked quietly. Or for you? Denise didn't answer, and that silence said enough. That night, the truth finally came out. Marcus sat across from Samuel at the dinner table, frustration showing on his face. You spent your whole life struggling, he said. Why refuse something better now? Samuel leaned back slowly. Do you remember your first bicycle? He asked. Marcus frowned. What does that have to do with this? You wanted the red one, Samuel continued. I worked double shifts for 3 months to buy it. Marcus looked down. Samuel's voice stayed calm, but heavier now. You never asked how we managed school fees, or rent, or why we stopped taking vacations. Lillian's hands tightened around her cup. We sold things, she said quietly. Things that mattered to us. The room went silent. For years, Samuel added. Our future was making sure yours was better. Marcus swallowed hard. This was not the conversation he expected. And when we needed you, Samuel said softly, you were busy building your own life. That's not wrong. That's life. But now this place is ours. Not angry, not accusing, just honest. And somehow that hurt more. Later that night, Marcus stepped outside alone. The mountain air felt colder than before. He watched strangers laughing around a small fire near the cabin. They looked like family. Something inside him shifted. Guilt mixed with something else he didn't want to admit. Regret. Inside the cabin, Lillian sat beside Samuel. Do you think we're being too hard on them? She asked. Samuel shook his head slowly. No, he said. We're just not being invisible anymore. But the next morning brought news that changed everything. Mr. Keller returned. This time his offer was bigger. Much bigger. Enough money to change not only Samuel and Lillian's lives, but Marcus and Denise's as well. And this time, the decision would not only test their independence. It would reveal whether their children truly came back for love or for ownership. The mountain stayed quiet, but the family was no longer at peace. The mountain felt different that morning. The air was colder, heavier, as if even nature was waiting for an answer. Samuel stood near the fence, repairing a loose board, but his hands moved slower than usual. His mind wasn't on the wood. It was on the number Mr. Keller had mentioned the night before. It was more money than Samuel had ever seen in his life. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to never worry again. Inside the cabin, Marcus and Denise whispered in the kitchen. Their voices were low, careful, but tension filled the room. This is a once-in-a-lifetime deal, Marcus said. If they say no, they're throwing everything away. Denise nodded, but her expression was uncertain. Watching their parents over the past days had unsettled her. They didn't look lonely anymore. They looked complete, and that made her feel like an outsider in her own childhood home. When Mr. Keller arrived again, he didn't come alone. 2 other men stepped out of the SUV, carrying folders and maps. They spread papers across the dining table, designs for luxury cabins, parking areas, restaurants, even a spa. The small mountain retreat was being turned into something unrecognizable. This area will grow fast, Keller explained smoothly. If you don't sell now, someone else will build around you. Noise, traffic, crowds. You may lose the peace you have. It sounded less like an offer and more like a warning. Lillian noticed it immediately. Samuel did too. Marcus leaned forward. Dad, this protects you. You can move somewhere easier. Somewhere safe. Samuel looked at him carefully. For who? He asked again. Marcus didn't answer. That evening, something unexpected happened. A young woman named Elena, one of the regular visitors, arrived at the cabin. She had stayed there weeks earlier while recovering from losing her job and going through a divorce. She brought fresh flowers and a small painting of the cabin. I just wanted to say thank you, she told Lillian. This place helped me breathe again. Marcus watched the interaction quietly. Elena spoke about how strangers shared meals together there, how people opened up around the fire, how the cabin felt different from any hotel or resort. This place isn't business, she said softly. It's healing. Her words stayed in the room long after she left. For the first time, Denise looked at the developer's plans and felt uncomfortable. None of the drawings showed people laughing together. Only buildings. That night, the argument finally exploded. Marcus lost patience. You're being emotional, he said loudly. This is smart. This is security. Why are you making this difficult? Lillian flinched at the tone. Samuel remained calm, but his eyes hardened slightly. Because not everything valuable can be sold, he said. Marcus stood up, frustrated. You think this place matters more than your own family? The words hung in the air. Heavy. Painful. Samuel's voice dropped, quiet but firm. This place saved us when our family forgot us. Silence filled the room. Denise looked down, tears forming in her eyes. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he had no argument. Because deep down, he knew it was true. Later, Denise walked outside alone. The mountain was dark except for the soft light coming from the cabin windows. She remembered childhood nights when Samuel fixed her toys and Lillian stayed awake when she was sick. Memories she had buried under work and success. She realized something painful. Their parents hadn't changed. They had simply stopped waiting. The next morning, Mr. Keller returned for an answer. Everyone gathered on the porch. The mountains stretched endlessly behind them, quiet witnesses to the moment. Samuel looked at Lillian. She nodded slightly. But before Samuel could speak, Marcus suddenly interrupted. Wait, he said. His voice was different now. Less confident. Less certain. Because during the night, he had discovered something in the documents. Something Keller had not explained clearly. Something that would change everything. The offer wasn't just about buying land. It meant destroying the cabin completely. Every part of it. The garden. The porch. The guest room. All gone. And for the first time, Marcus wasn't sure he wanted that either. The silence returned, heavier than before. Because now the decision was no longer about money. It was about what kind of family they wanted to be after everything that had already been lost. The morning air felt sharp, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. No one spoke after Marcus revealed the truth. The cabin would not be rebuilt or improved. It would be erased, replaced by modern buildings, glass walls, and paved roads. The warmth that had slowly grown there would disappear. Mr. Keller adjusted his tie, still calm. Change is necessary for progress, he said smoothly. You'll gain far more than you lose. Samuel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the porch floor beneath his feet, what he had cut and placed himself. Every mark carried a memory. Every nail held a moment of rebuilding, not just of the cabin, but of their lives. Lillian stood beside him quietly. For years, she had feared losing everything. Now she realized something important. They already had, and survived it. Marcus felt something twisting inside his chest. He looked at the developer's plans again, but this time he didn't see opportunity. He saw absence. No garden. No shared tables. No strangers becoming friends. Just business. He remembered the hospital night when his mother had called, and he chose work instead. He remembered telling himself he would visit later. Later never came. Until now. And suddenly, the money didn't feel exciting anymore. It felt like another mistake waiting to happen. Denise broke the silence first. What happens to the people who come here? she asked Keller. He shrugged slightly. They'll go somewhere else. There are many resorts. But Denise knew that wasn't true. There were many resorts. There were not many places like this. She looked at her parents, older now, slower, but somehow stronger than she remembered. They had built something without asking for recognition, without asking for profit, just kindness. And she realized how rare that was. Later that afternoon, Marcus walked with Samuel along the edge of the property. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and fresh bread from the kitchen. I thought I was helping, Marcus said quietly. Samuel nodded. I know. There was no anger in his voice. That made it harder. I didn't see how much this meant to you, Marcus admitted. Samuel stopped walking. For a long time, he said slowly, we thought we didn't matter anymore. This place reminded us we still did. Marcus looked down at the ground, ashamed. I should have come sooner. Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. You came now. It wasn't forgiveness spoken loudly, but it was enough. That evening, everyone gathered on the porch again. Mr. Keller waited for their final decision. Samuel looked at Lillian. She smiled softly, the same way she had when they first arrived at the broken cabin. Then Samuel spoke. We're not selling. The words were simple. Final. Keller's polite expression faded. He tried once more, mentioning higher offers, future risks, missed opportunities. Samuel shook his head. This place isn't an investment, he said. It's a second chance. The developer left shortly after, his car disappearing down the mountain road. Silence followed, but this time it felt peaceful. That night, something changed between the family. Marcus helped repair the fence without being asked. Denise cooked beside Lillian, laughing nervously at first, then naturally. It felt unfamiliar, but real. For the first time in years, they weren't discussing business or success. They were simply together. Yet the story wasn't finished, because turning down the offer created a new problem. The surrounding land was still being bought by developers. Construction would begin nearby soon. Noise, traffic, and pressure would follow. Keeping the cabin meant fighting to protect it. And that fight would require something none of them expected. Sacrifice. Later, as Samuel turned off the porch light, he noticed Marcus staring at the mountains. What are you thinking? Samuel asked. Marcus hesitated before answering. Maybe this place shouldn't just belong to us anymore. Samuel frowned slightly. Marcus continued, his voice unsure but sincere. Maybe it should belong to everyone it helped. Samuel didn't reply, but the idea stayed with him. Because sometimes saving something beautiful meant letting go of ownership in a different way. And by morning, Marcus would make a decision that could either save the cabin forever or risk losing it all again. The mountain woke slowly the next morning, covered in soft fog. Samuel stepped outside before sunrise, as he always did. The air was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Marcus's words from the night before stayed with him. Maybe this place shouldn't just belong to us anymore. At first, the idea felt strange. The cabin had been their escape, their healing. Letting others become part of it felt risky. But Samuel also knew something else. The cabin had never truly been only theirs. It had grown because people came, stayed, and left pieces of their stories behind. Inside, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of him. He hadn't slept much. Denise watched him carefully. You're serious about this? She asked. Marcus nodded slowly. If developers buy everything around us, they'll eventually force change anyway, he said. But if the cabin becomes protected, if it belongs to a community instead of individuals, they can't touch it. Denise understood immediately. Not selling, but sharing. Not for profit, for preservation. When Samuel and Lillian heard the idea, they didn't answer right away. Lillian walked outside and looked at the garden. The flowers had grown strong despite harsh winters. People often sat there quietly, drinking tea, talking about things they couldn't say anywhere else. She remembered her first night in the cabin, crying because she felt forgotten. Now strangers came there to feel remembered. Would it still feel like home? She asked softly. Marcus hesitated. Only if you allow it to. Samuel looked at his son carefully. For the first time, Marcus wasn't talking like a businessman. He was talking like someone trying to fix something broken. The idea spread faster than anyone expected. Elena returned after hearing about it and offered to help organize volunteers. A local hiking group donated tools. Visitors who had once stayed for a night began sending messages asking how they could help. One man offered to repair the water system. Another offered to build walking paths. A retired teacher asked if she could host small reading weekends for travelers. The cabin was no longer just a destination. It was becoming a community. And with every new person who arrived to help, Samuel noticed something unexpected. Marcus stayed. He worked quietly, fixing roofs, carrying wood, listening more than speaking. Denise helped Lillian cook meals for volunteers, laughing in the kitchen like she used to as a child. No one said it out loud, but something was healing. Not perfectly, but honestly. One evening, as everyone gathered around a fire outside, Elena spoke softly. "You know why people love this place?" she said. "Because no one feels judged here. People arrive tired and leave lighter." Samuel watched the fire crackle. He realized the cabin had become something he never planned. A place where people found second chances. Just like he and Lillian had. But peace never comes without challenge. A letter arrived 2 days later. A construction company had officially purchased nearby land. Heavy machinery would arrive within weeks. Road would be expanded. Noise and crowds were coming. The threat was real now. If the cabin was going to survive, they needed legal protection quickly. That meant paperwork, planning, and decisions Samuel never wanted to deal with again. For a moment, doubt returned. Was this too big for them? That night, Marcus sat with Samuel on the porch. "I can handle the legal side," Marcus said quietly. "Let me do this right this time." Samuel studied his son's face. He saw exhaustion, regret, but also determination. "You don't owe us this," Samuel said. Marcus shook his head. "I do," he replied. "Not because you asked, because I finally understand." The words were simple, but they carried years of unspoken apology. Samuel nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud, not of success, but of growth. As the days passed, more people arrived to help. The cabin looked brighter than ever. Laughter filled the air again. But Lillian noticed something Samuel didn't. The work was tiring him. He hit it well, but age was catching up. His steps were slower. His hands shook sometimes when he thought no one was watching. Saving the cabin was costing him energy he no longer had. And soon, Lillian would be forced to make a decision Samuel might never agree to. A decision about letting go, not of the cabin, but of control. Because sometimes love meant stepping back, so something beautiful could continue without you. And in the final chapter, the family would face one last emotional test. Not about money, not about ownership, but about legacy. The mountain was quieter than usual that morning. Not empty, just calm, like the land itself knew something important was about to change. Samuel sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. The cabin looked different now. The roof was stronger, the garden full of color, and laughter often filled the air again. People came and went, but the warmth always stayed. It had become more than a home. It had become a place people carried with them long after leaving. But Lillian noticed what others didn't. Samuel was tired. He still worked every day, still smiled at visitors, still fixed things that didn't need fixing. But age had quietly caught up with him. His hands rested longer between tasks. His breathing grew heavier after small walks. She knew what he wouldn't admit. He was afraid that if he stopped working, the place would stop living. That morning, she sat beside him and held his hand. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she said gently. Samuel stared at the mountains. "If I stop, what happens to all of this?" Lillian smiled softly. "It keeps going." The community meeting happened that evening. Visitors, volunteers, neighbors, people from different places gathered around the cabin. Some had stayed only one night months ago. Others had returned again and again because the place meant something to them. Marcus stood in front of everyone, nervous but determined. He explained the plan. The cabin would become a protected community retreat. A small nonprofit foundation would manage it. No luxury expansion. No selling to developers. The land would stay simple, peaceful, open to people who needed rest more than comfort. Samuel listened quietly. This was the moment he had feared, letting go of control. But as he looked around, he saw something unexpected. People weren't there for business. They were there because the cabin had helped them. A woman spoke about recovering from grief there. A young couple said it saved their marriage. A hiker said it was the first place he felt welcome after losing his job and home. Story after story filled the night. Lillian squeezed Samuel's hand. "You see," she whispered, "it was never just ours." Samuel's eyes grew wet, though he tried to hide it. For years, he thought being needed meant working harder. Now he realized something different. Sometimes being needed meant knowing when to step back. Weeks later, the paperwork was finished. The cabin officially belonged to the community. Samuel and Lillian still lived there, but they were no longer responsible for carrying everything alone. Volunteers rotated responsibilities. Marcus handled legal matters. Denise organized visits and events. The family that once drifted apart now worked side by side. Not perfectly, but honestly. One afternoon, Marcus found Samuel sitting quietly near the garden. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. Samuel shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I thought we were losing something." He looked at the people laughing near the porch. "But we were actually making sure it lasts longer than us." Marcus nodded, understanding at last. Success wasn't always about owning something. Sometimes it was about protecting it for others. Seasons passed. The cabin became known not as a resort, but as a refuge. People came when life became too heavy. They left messages in a wooden box by the door, thanking the couple who turned abandonment into kindness. Samuel read those notes often, not with pride, with peace. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Lillian leaned against him on the porch. "Do you remember the first night here?" she asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "You said we made a mistake." Lillian laughed softly. "Maybe we did." He looked at the glowing windows, the garden, the people gathered around the fire. "Best mistake we ever made," he said. Far down the mountain road, new buildings rose and traffic increased. The world kept changing, but the cabin remained the same. Warm lights, open doors, a place where people who felt forgotten could remember their worth again. And long after Samuel and Lillian stopped fixing fences or planting flowers, their story continued. Not in ownership, but in every person who arrived broken and left hopeful. They were once abandoned, but in the end, they built something no one could abandon again. A paradise made not from money, but from forgiveness, second chances, and love that finally learned how to let go.